Okay. Yeah.
Today we have with us Dr. Mohsen Nagheeby. He's an interdisciplinary scholar based at the Newcastle University Center for Water, working at the intersection of international law, environmental politics, and water governance. Research develops critical approaches to transboundary water cooperation, including the concepts of hydro-legal geopolitics, the capitalist black hole in water governance, and decolonizing water diplomacy. He has published in leading journals such as Political Geography, Water Alternatives, Third World Quarterly, and Transnational Environmental Law, and engages closely with policy communities and international organizations on water governance and diplomacy. Dr. Mohsen Nagheeby, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So do you have my slide? You have full slide, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And it's really pleasure to be part of this from African Studies Forum and program. So my talk is about a very simple but uncomfortable question, but I think you in your program also deal with these uncomfortable questions related to decolonization or colonial literature. When we say water diplomacy produces peace in a broader context of diplomacy as we have, whose peace are we talking about? And I think this question feels especially urgent today and very timely as war, displacement, ecological crisis, and geopolitical instability are going around us, particularly as we see in West Asia. And water diplomacy, when we are talking about, is the diplomatic arm of broader water governance, either globally or nationally or locally. It is often presented as a positive field. It promises cooperation, dialogue, conflict prevention, benefit sharing between actors, and also particularly aims to reach regional stability. Of course, none of these are unimportant aims, but my argument today is that this dominant language of security, peace, stability, often shaped by Eurocentric knowledge traditions, and they can also hide deeper questions of justice, identity, history, and also power. So I want to ask today whether water diplomacy needs simply more expert knowledge, better tools, and better institutions, or whether it requires a deeper, more radical epistemological shift. And I think this is very fit also in your program, African Studies, for researching the epistemologies. And let me begin with this metaphor. We just mentioned this before starting the session. From Tintin's gaze back to Maulana's river. What I mean here, by Tintin's gaze, I mean an outsider gaze, the gaze that maps, classifies, and narrates other people's worlds from above. It is the gaze of the travelers, the expert, the well-known consultant, the imperial officer, the satellite image, the report writer, even in the United Nations, sometimes well-intentioned, but still speaking for others. And by Maulana, or so-called Rumi's river, I mean something different, a rooted, relational, and ethical understanding of water. Water as a memory, water as dignity, water as relation, water as something that belongs to lived worlds, not only to policy frameworks. And I want to be clear, this is not about just, because I was asked, many times, that is it about rejecting Western knowledge? No, it is about refusing the monopoly of one gaze over rivers. So I want to focus on two absences. First, who and what is not represented in water diplomacy and decision-making? And second, how are water issues represented? Often water diplomacy includes governments, technical experts, donors, international lawyers, and also basin organizations. But many local communities are only weakly present or are invited after the basic terms of discussion have already been set. But my focus here is even beyond people or the participation. My focus is on certain meanings of water, which are also absent, the philosophy behind water. And this image takes me to the question of storytelling, which is, I think, very important in our world. I use this reference to 1001 Nights because it reminds us that storytelling is not ornamental. Storytelling can be a matter of survival. In that story world, survival depends on who controls the story, who continues the narrative, and who is allowed to speak. In water diplomacy, too, those who control the story often control what becomes visible, legitimate, and negotiable. Is the river narrated by states, by donors, by engineers, by military and security actors, by international organizations, or by the communities who live with the river? So I begin from my own cultural archive, but this is not a Persian argument. Pretty sure similar questions are central to African and other global South epistemologies too. Who speaks, who remembers, who belongs, and whose knowledge is treated as valid. And even more critically, who is the architect of our mindset in relation to which knowledge tradition, which philosophy, which history led us to see water in a particular way. The dominant knowledge traditions that teach us what counts as problem, what counts as evidence, and what counts as a solution currently in modern water diplomacy is not an exception to other fields. And this architecture reminds us about the dominant Eurocentric and how it leaves other epistemic alone. So my argument, I just start with my argument and the core argument that I do try to present it today. Water diplomacy remains organized around a security peace imagination. But peace can stabilize colonial histories, erased identities, and unequal political economies. So hydro-decolonisation shifts the field from security peace to equity identity. In other words, I'm not asking only how water can produce peace. In my presentation today, I'm challenging whether peace itself can be just when it builds on unresolved colonial histories, epistemic domination in particular, and also geopolitical interests and unequal material condition. So bear with me to see why I propose that hydro-decolonisation must be treated as a new or forced paradigm in water politics. And this slide is not here for chronology. I do not want to walk through every event, but it gives us a very good picture. The point is simple. We have had more than half a century of global water declaration, conferences, legal principles, development goals, human rights language, producing knowledge, including integrated water resource management, sustainable development goals, and cooperation agendas. But the question is not simply, do we need more water governance? The more difficult question is, what kind of water governance, based on whose philosophy, whose knowledge, and whose priorities? And despite all this global attention, the outcomes remain deeply unequal. Millions continue to lack safe drinking water. Billions lack adequate sanitation. Food insecurity remains severe and it's becoming much more serious issue. And this is why water diplomacy matters. More than 60% of the world's fresh water is in transboundary basins. There are hundreds of transboundary river and lake basins, and many states share at least one water body. So cooperation is necessary. I'm not arguing against cooperation. My critique is more specific. I'm against cooperation or the type of diplomacy that treats peace and stability as enough. And let me now briefly situate the field in a theoretical perspective. In simplified terms, transboundary water politics has often been organized around three dominant paradigms. First, water war. You heard likely that the next world war is on water. The idea that scarcity leads to conflict and war. The second paradigm is water peace, the idea that shared water more often produces cooperation than war. Then the third one is conflict cooperation coexistence, the critical insight that conflict and cooperation are not opposites. They often coexist and power shapes both. These paradigms are not simply wrong. Each corrected something in the previous one. Water peace corrected simplistic water war thinking, and then critical hydropolitics corrected the simplistic conflict cooperation binary. But my argument is that all of these three still struggle to escape the security peace horizon. So let's go to the first paradigm. The first paradigm is the water war narrative. This became prominent, especially after the Cold War, when water scarcity was increasingly linked to national security, military security, environmental security, food security, and also now we hear about climate security. The basic idea coming from realist and Malthusian perspective is that scarcity can generate competition, instability, and even armed conflicts. This framing is powerful because it makes water politically urgent, but it also has problems. It tends to securitize water. It can portray certain regions, especially in the global south, as naturally conflict prone. And if it often reduces complex historical and political conflicts to resource scarcity alone. Then came the water peace response, mainly from a liberal perspective. This literature challenged the claim that the states usually go to war over water. It showed that cooperation is more common than conflict. Treaties, river basin organizations, technical committees, benefit sharing, and data exchange were presented as a pathway to peace in this way of thinking. Of course, this was an important correction, but it also created a new optimism. If we can get cooperation, institutions, treaties, and benefit sharing between countries, then we are moving toward peace. And my question is, what happens if cooperation itself rests on unequal power? What if the arrangement stabilizes injustice? What if peace becomes the name for an unequal order? So when we celebrate water cooperation and diplomacy, what exactly are we celebrating? This is where I want to shift the question from whether cooperation exists to what kind of order cooperation produces. And then after this second one, the answer to such these concerns and questions are in the third paradigm, associated with critical hydropolitics, that offers a more complex view. It rejects the idea that we must choose between conflict and cooperation. In many river basins, conflict and cooperation coexist together. States can sign agreements and still maintain domination. They can share data and still reproduce asymmetry. They can cooperate technically while communities remain desposes. This literature on critical hydropolitics is crucial because it brings power into the analysis. Concepts such as hydrohegemony show that cooperation itself can be shaped by domination. But I want to push further than this. If we recognize power, we also need to ask how identity, memory, colonial history, and epistemic authority structure water diplomacy. So my point is not that equity and justice are absent from all critical hydropolitics. That would be unfair. I created my argument also based on critical hydropolitics. My point, and I want to make this very carefully, is that equity and identity are not yet the organizing center of the paradigm. Security and peace still often remain the horizon. Water war frames water as a threat. Water peace frames water as cooperation. And then critical hydropolitics frames water as a power relation. But all three still often lead us back to the question, how do we manage conflict and secure peace? That's it. These paradigms are not neutral analytical tools. They emerge from particular intellectual histories rooted in Eurocentric traditions of international relations, security studies, liberal institutionalism, and so on. We also need to consider the positionality of the lead scholars, institutions, and also funding structures in each of these paradigms, and to ask how a field shaped largely through Euro-American and predominantly white knowledge traditions, focusing only or mostly on security and peace. So now hydro-decolonization asks a different starting question. Whose equity and identity have been denied, harmed, or erased? And how must water diplomacy respond? This dominant agenda that I spoke about, the security peace agenda, has become institutionally very powerful across all the world. You can hear in every channel, media, universities, programs, conferences, in organizations, donor programs, security agendas, development initiatives, that this security peace agenda is very dominant. It's very, 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 very core at the core of the program. So the issue is not the passport of scholars or donors. The issue is how certain institutional agendas become globally dominant, especially when they are funded through foreign policy, security priorities. And here is exactly we need to ask about the epistemology of the agenda. And so when we hear Water for Peace in the World Water Day, just I think a couple of years ago, we need to ask, whose peace? Peace for whom? What do we expect peace to do? Does peace mean justice, or does it mean just stability? So I make three critiques of this dominant security peace framing. First, there is a materialist bias. Second, there is a representational bias. And third, there is a geopolitical function. And I will explain one by one. The first critique is about the materialist focus of the dominant wisdom. Critical hydropolitics has shown that conflict and cooperation coexist. But even here, the analytical emphasis, as you see in the framework here, often remains on interest, political economy, and power. Of course, these are important, but I want to push further. Identity is not just a background variable. Identity is a constitutive. It shapes what actors believe they are entitled to, what they perceive as humiliation, what they remember as injustice, and what they consider a legitimate settlement. In many conflicts, the deepest question is not simply what we have in critical hydropolitics, who gets how much water, though it is very significant, but it is also who are we in relation to this river and what has been denied to us historically. This is where hydro-decolonization differs from simply adding justice into existing analysis. It asks whether the basic categories of diplomacy, including peace, cooperation, security, have themselves been shaped by colonial and geopolitical power or not. And in relation to the first critics, the second point I can mention is about the global political economy and representation. Security peace narratives often sit inside a broader global system where the global north externalizes environmental and social costs to the south, and then narrates the south as unstable, failed, or in need of intervention. We see this in food systems, energy transitions, mining, virtual water, climate burdens, and development aid. For example, the green transition in the north may rely on extractive conditions in the south. The push for electric vehicles globally, or particularly in the US, for example, depends on mineral extracted from places such as Congo under deeply unequal conditions. High living standards in places like Germany to reduce agricultural lands can depend on externalized land, water, and ecological pressure elsewhere, including through virtual water trade. Then the same regions affected by these dynamics are narrated as fragile, unstable, or badly governed. So water diplomacy cannot be separated from the global structure founded on materialist interests that produce such this water insecurity globally. The second main criticism is about representational asymmetry. This is not simply a factual disagreement over water management. It is about how one side can be narrated as innovative, efficient, and modern, while the other appears mainly as crisis, lack, dependency, or mismanagement. In our recent work on decolonizing water diplomacy, we discuss how colonial and neo-colonial arrangements continue to shape water governance across the Southwest Asia and North Africa, including Palestine, the occupied Syrian Golan, and the occupied Western Sahara. Water, energy, and green development narratives can become ways of normalizing control rather than challenging it, and all of them funded by the global north. So decolonizing water diplomacy asks who produces these images and what do they hide? So representation shapes policy. If one actor is seen as modern and rational and hero, and another as deficient and unstable, the diplomatic table is already unequal before negotiations begin. And the third critique is how peace is easily fade into geopolitical dynamics. In an anarchic international system, peace is rarely innocent. Peace can mean the stabilization of arrangements that serve powerful actors. Many wars have been justified in the name of peace, security, democracy, as we see also today. In water diplomacy, the same danger exists. Peace can become a language through which powerful actors manage instability without addressing the historical causes of injustice. And this is perfectly exemplified in the case of Afghanistan. This might not be really related to water diplomacy, but it's really catch the point. Huh? And external projects pursued in the name of security and peace can fail catastrophically when identity, justice, and local political realities are ignored. I'm pretty sure you remember this image. Huh? So the quote here, it's not just about the Afghan people, it's about our security, end of the quote, captures the problem. The declared aim may be peace, but the reference point is external security. For water diplomacy, the lesson is that interventions framed through security and peace can ignore the internal histories, identities, and grievances that actually shape political life. And let me just give some examples that develops the same critique in relation to climate and water security narratives. You may have heard claims that drought and climate change caused wars in places like Syria, Darfur, or Sudan, right? The problem is not that climate change and drought do not matter. They do. They can intensify vulnerability and stress. But the problem is the reductionism. When wars are explained mainly as drought or climate stress, colonial histories, unfair global political economy, militarization, intervention, invasions just can't disappear. Huh? In Sudan, for example, British colonial rule contributed to a divided political ecology, a more developed center around Khartoum and neglected subordinate peripheries. These histories shaped land, water, hierarchy, and conflict. And yet, Western narratives often simplify such conflicts into clashes between just farmers and herders, or into climate war stories, without addressing the colonial and neo-colonial legacy. And this brings me to a central distinction: peace or pacification. If peace only means the absence of visible conflict, then peace can coexist with disposition. A river basin can be peaceful in the sense that the states are not fighting while communities remain displaced, indigenous rights remains ignored, or occupation remains normalized. This is why peace and war can become two sides of the same coin. Both may preserve the wider order. Huh? Okay, so after these three critiques, that suggests security and peace are not neutral categories, and they are shaped by material interest, biased representation, and geopolitics. And now I want to place rivers inside history, not only hydrological history, but colonial and imperial history, to see how this dominant epistemology or language of peace and security in water diplomacy may serve particular agenda. Hydrologically, rivers flow downhill, right? But politically, rivers have often been made to flow through imperial routes, trade corridors, or military geographies. So when we ask where rivers in the Middle East, or better to say West Asia, flow, the answer is not only geographical. They flow through histories of empires, trade, particularly oil now. And to understand why security peace is so powerful, we need to place rivers inside imperial and new imperial routes, not just natural basins. And the point of this map is not ancient trade history. The point is that water, canals, ports, and rivers have long been embedded in global circulation and imperial strategy. Routes through the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Suez Canal, and the Indian Ocean were not just commercial lines. They were strategic arteries of empire. And between these, we have water treaties, we have water infrastructure, we have navigation, canals. Particularly, the very good example is in India during the British colonial order. So modern water diplomacy should be seen through that colonial legacy. And this slide makes that point more directly. The imperial network connected India, Egypt, Palestine, Persia, and other regions through routes, ports, canals, and military corridors. And control over water and territory was part of maintaining access and power. So rivers such as Nile, Jordan, Tigris, and Euphrates were and are not only local or regional waters, they were and also are part of imperial calculations. And the mandate system established by European regimes during the World Wars is important because it shows how colonial power reorganized territory while presenting itself as administration and development. After the First World War, or what we might also understand as a war between some countries over much of the rest of the world, many territories were reorganized through international legal and political framework. And water, land infrastructure, and borders were shaped inside this system. And I just wanted to highlight that how the current water diplomacy, as you see, the very similar pattern during the history was just embedded in this system and this colonial and neo-colonial pattern. This is why the three dominant wisdom or paradigms in relation to water diplomacy or water politics are not enough. And this is why hydro-decolonisation is not only about the past colonialism, it's about coloniality, the persistence of colonial forms of knowledge in particular, authority, and also intervention. And this slide may look overloaded, but bear with me. The message is very clear, it's not very intense. We come up with the idea of the capitalist black hole just recently through our 5 years of collaboration with several colleagues in Colombia, Ethiopia, Malaysia, and India. And it's very useful in our talk here. The argument in our recent work is that water is increasingly pulled toward profit-driven activities and powerful actors, while alternative knowledge and justice claims are marginalized. We use the metaphor of a capitalist black hole to describe this very strong gravitational pull of capital within water governance, ruled by a king. We call it Mammon, the greedy nature of a human. And in simple terms, the global north did not necessarily reduce pressure on water by changing its own lifestyle, as it is argued in modern literature. But often pressure was displaced elsewhere through trade, extraction, supply chain, food system, energy transitions, and development finance. This is what I mean by the supply gap in the north. And this north demand for resources is often met through extraction from the south. Now, the dominant agenda is crucial, and water diplomacy as a diplomatic tool of water governance and also the peace security language emerged to serve this supply gap in the north. So even when we speak of cooperation, the diplomatic table is already shaped by finance, like in the World Bank, by infrastructure funded by Western countries, markets dominated by the north, donors like USAID, international consultants, mainly in the types of Tintin that we discussed, legal templates, and also geopolitical priorities. These forces create a gravitational pull. They pull water governance toward investment growth to serve the global north or the dominant capitalist system. So again, the question becomes, can water diplomacy really deliver justice if the table of the diplomatic negotiation itself is pulled by capital? And this is why narrative matters. Narrative or not just decoration after the facts. Narrative shape what becomes visible, what becomes fundable, what becomes legitimate, and what, of course, becomes impossible to say. If the dominant narrative is based on the first paradigm that was water scarcity will cause war, then the policy response becomes security. We can see this, for example, in how Nile Basin debates have often been framed and also failed after at least 30 years through a scarcity or the language of security and also regional stability. If the dominant narrative would be based on the second paradigm, the better cooperation brings peace, then the response become easily, okay, let's have institution and agreements and everything will be okay, solved. And we have this, for example, in the Jordan River Basin. The language of cooperation and peace can highlight agreements and technical arrangements while leaving deeper asymmetries, occupation, historical injustices, and even genocide less visible. But imagine if the narrative is being changed. The narrative would be water injustice is rooted in colonial histories, erased identities, and unequal political economy. Then I'm pretty sure, and I think you agree with me, that the response must be very different to other narratives. So this brings us back to again to Tintin's gaze. Again, I'm not talking about one comic character. I'm using Tintin as a metaphor for the outsider gaze that sees river as objects to be mapped, managed, and narrated for someone else's audience. This gaze maps from above, and today often from satellite, you see, models and many dashboards. It speaks for others. It turns rivers into objects. It treats local walls as data, only data, or numbers. And we can see this in many big funded projects by the North. Much of modern water diplomacy still carries this gaze. And this is why I shift to Maulana's or Rumi's river. And it's not just nostalgia.
Amazing. What has happened to our speaker?
We've lost him. I'll try to reach out to him.
Oh, okay. Hello, Hanan. How are you?
Hey, sorry. Hello again. Sorry.
Okay.
The connection was just lost. Sorry.
Okay. We thought you had gone to jump into the water.
Can I share again?
Yes.
Yes.
We started with Molana. I think everything was just gone, huh? So do you have my slides, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry for that. Yeah, so the idea of Maulana, is a reminder that many traditions across the world understand water as relation, not just resource. And this is not only a West Asian or Persian insight. In Africa, African philosophical traditions, Ubuntu often expressed as "I'm because we are" offers another language for thinking about rivers, not as objects of allocation, but as relations that constitute community, responsibility, particular, and life, and challenging the individualist thinking that is very sitting at the core knowledge of Eurocentric and also state-centric assumptions. So the point is not to replace one canon with another. The point is to reopen the epistemological archive of water. And this is the shift I'm proposing in relation to water diplomacy. Mainstream water diplomacy, as I discussed, often begins from sovereignty, security, states, interest, stability, risk, and peace. And a decolonial approach begins from societal security. It starts or particularly put the focus on identity, equity, and lived realities. And it does not ignore states' law or cooperation, but it refuses to make them the only center. The shift is from interest alone to identity, from peace as order to equity as the foundational of legitimate peace, and from water as a only resource, specifically in a materialistic perspective, to water as relation and memory and justice. And the iceberg image works well, I think, to show why the visible surface is not enough. Security and peace are often what we see above the waterline, but below the surface are histories of grievances, humiliation, identity, recognition, memory, resentment, and unresolved harm. If diplomacy, which is currently dealing with, does not address what is below, peace remains fragile or false. This is why I argue that the starting point of decolonizing water diplomacy should be the creation of collective identity over shared water resources. I'm just, I think, run out of the time, but just some examples. For example, the issue of equity identity in Palestine. If we use a simple conflict cooperation lens, we may see agreements and negotiations, everything looks good. But if we ask equity identity questions, everything will be changed. Even the representation of the water issues in Palestine is misleading or misrepresented. For example, in Ramallah, we have more annual rainfall than London, that nobody knows about it because it shows mostly as a desert or with with less water. So, and in our article also, we argue that water in Palestine is not merely a resource management question, and it needs to address the colonial history and also the neo-colonial issues. And when you go to, for example, North Africa and the Western Sahara, you can see the funded Western projects on green investment, how they are producing much more that capitalist black hole that we talked about it. And just very close to you, in the Columbia River is often presented as a successful model of transboundary cooperation between the United States and Canada. But indigenous communities remind us that their knowledge and their epistemology is being ignored. And you can see that in the quote from one of the indigenous leaders, that we are not at the table, but near it. So hydro-decolonisation is not about adding more stakeholders or just adding justice to the analysis, to an old table. It is about asking whether the table itself must be reconstructed or not. And I think it's better might be just 2 slides if I'm allowed. So what changes in diplomacy in a hydro-decolonisation perspective? First, we move from managing conflict to confronting injustice and putting this as a priority. Second, we move from including voices to redistributing narrative power. And third, we move from more knowledge, particularly from Eurocentric dominance, to accountable knowledge production, and particularly to see the architecture of the mindset and to even back to the history of a very rich knowledge that we had in the global South. And fourth, we move from peace as a stability to peace as justice. And I want to end with the three questions that have been running through our talk. Whose peace, whose water, and whose story? And my answer is that water diplomacy cannot be just if it only asks how to secure peace. Huh? It must ask whose histories, identities, and claims have been erased in the name of peace. And let me end with a short clip from Kwam Tur because it captures, I think, the distinction I'm making very, very good. And it doesn't need just 40 minutes talk, but let me just play this.
There's a difference between peace and liberation, is there not? You can have injustice and have peace. Isn't that correct? You can have peace and be enslaved.
Yes.
So peace isn't the answer.
Yeah.
Liberation is the answer.
Yes, of course.
Okay, that's what you should talk about, never peace. That's the white man's right, peace. Liberation is our word.
But you want peace in the end.
Yes, but you can't have peace until everybody's equal.
But you seem free at the moment.
I seem peaceful at the moment.
You seem free.
I seem peaceful. There's a difference.
Yeah, and for water diplomacy, that means peace is not enough if the river remains colonized, and hopefully all of us be in peace and also liberated. Thank you, and I look forward for the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohsen. Professor Makoni, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohsen. This was fascinating. It's something that it's an area that I've always, that I'm recently spending some time thinking about. And I want to get into this conversation by asking a question that I think you have already begun to answer, but perhaps you can elaborate on. You're interested in issues about water diplomacy, water and security, but what is water?
That's excellent question. Excellent question. I have this slide in my lecture that what is water actually, and
Oh, okay.
and then this is very, 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 very important question. That if you look at the meaning of water, there might be some common understanding of water in the world. Everyone needs water as a human, in terms of the health, as you all also have water. I'm also thirsty. But if you look at the relation of different cultures or different identities, then the value of the water may differ from community by community. And even if it is important for many societies, many communities, the way that they behave with water, or the way that they respect water, is very different. I don't want to make this very binary, because if we live in the West, and with respect with the societies in the West, the water is also very valuable for communities here on. But then when it goes in practice, linking to the individualistic perspective of these societies, then treating water is going to be very different, which is we see now here. It's becoming very. I don't want to say this. I mean, to make it very distinguished or divided between societies, but how you see water is really impacting on how you behave water and use water. Then we can ask about the question of how you prioritize economy in using water, or you prioritize identity and culture when you use water. I hope I answer your question, but
yes.
I mean, what I said, the meaning of water, as you said, is very important, differs from society to society. And it's very important because it's linked to the epistemology of knowledge and the practice of using water.
Okay. So you would agree that epistemologically, water is plural?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Right. Now, let
It's
me.
plural, but in practice might be. I usually give this example in. I mean,
Uh,
pretty sure you all heard about this because many ask, okay, what is this decolonization or colonization?
yes, yes.
And I usually give this. I mean, pretty sure many of you heard about this. Again, it's a metaphoric story that when two white people, two Tintins,
Uh, uh,
enter the one African land,
uh,
and then they wanted to check or to analyze the community and to see how they behave or what they how they think, and they put a candle in one corner. And they asked, or make it like a competition or game. They said everyone can reach the candle. He will or she will receive a prize, huh? And then the community looking like, I mean, it's like two separate worlds. First, they laugh them. They take their hands together, make a circle, walk together, making around the candle and share the light with together. And this was shocking for the perspective of the Tintin because it's not the same in that society. It's very individualistic. Everyone likely run to get the candle first, huh? So this is might be different, and this is why, of course,
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Now, my next question is, if you then move from talking about water, you talked about security and conflict and peace. I want you to elaborate a bit more. What is the nature, first of all, how you conceptualize peace, for example? Is it positive peace? Is it negative peace? And how you relate peace and conflict. Are they binaries or are they different sides of the same coin? Because once I get something to hold on to in terms of how you frame conflict, peace, and on conflict and peace, then I would introduce the aspects about water, and we see how we can talk about hydrocolonialism. Right.
Yeah, it's also a very good question. I think conceptually, peace is not alone from war. I mean, conflict, as we discussed as well.
Yeah.
In a critical hydro, also they came with this idea that conflict and cooperation coexist. In a
Yeah.
human nature, we at the same time we have peace, but struggling with some conflict itself. Huh? So both are together. But the definition of peace, again, back to the epistemology and the cultural aspects and the identity aspect, is very different, or at least it is represented wrongly to the world for many
Okay.
reasons.
Okay.
Because it's linked, as I said, it's very linked to this geopolitical peace for the sake of some or otherizing peace. Let's say,
Yes. Yeah.
peace for someone's only. So it's not it's detached from the core concepts of justice that we have. Also the Luther Martin King that says peace without justice is not peace, huh?
It's not peace. Okay. Now, I want to get back to the discussion about water, because you talked about Palestine, Israel, and all that. But I want to focus this because of a series of conversations I have once in a while, weekly, with a colleague who is here called Hanan, who works on deserts in Arab literature. Now, from your scholarly experience, how is water understood and framed within a desert?
Within desert.
Yes, within deserts.
Yeah. That's also a very lovely question. And it's really I mean, it's very good to show that how people in deserts look differently to water, to those places that water is enough or abundant.
Yes.
And that is is when water is scarce, communities, at least in the global, I mean, I think generally in the world, has much more respect because humanity is priority. So this is one point. But the second point, which is linked to this dominant wisdom, which is very Eurocentric, and which is linked to the first two paradigms that I mentioned. They picturize this water scarcity in deserts, that people, because water is scarce, people are going to fight over that. And in my experience and many field studies, it was shocking. It was totally opposite. Very poor. I mean, it's very, very, very usual that it is says in university, in the poor community, in the poor society, the conflict is more, people are going to fight with each other over resources. But it's very opposite in at least in my field experience. When you go to the poor region, people are much more kind together. And we see, and it was very highlighted during the COVID time, when you compare the communities in a very rich countries, how they fight over very few options in the market rather than to other people in the poor countries.
Good. Right. Now let me ask the last question, which I think you can draw on your own educational experiences. You referred to a course that you teach on water. Can you just provide a brief? I'm just curious to know how that course looks like and how the students, what are the objectives of that course, and how do the students react to that course?
Well, yeah. So I don't have a particular course on decolonization, but
on decolonization and water. Let's say on hydro-coloniality, that includes water.
It's very, very, very shocking for many. It's very shocking because even for us, when you see something very differently, which has been cemented for many, let's say, decades and centuries.
Yes.
And then you see differently, okay. And especially this idea about the capitalist black hole was for many students and even practitioners and scholars, it's very, very, very interesting and very new things. And first it's very difficult for them to capture it because again it's very difficult to see differently. It was they learned in universities from those dominant knowledge and dominant epistemology, and then you are going to tell them what is different. But it's after that it's very interesting for them, and it's like a brightening their mindset, especially when you are going to tackle the architecture of the mindset. What you learn, where is the source of what you learn, and that's interesting. And it's not only about the students for the global south. We have this issue here in the north as well. So in the United Kingdom, and between the societies, between communities, and this is something I think very, very interesting that needs to be elaborated more and more.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me hand over to Amazing to do an amazing moderation. Right.
No one has a question yet, but I have okay, Ashraf.
Ashraf.
And I'll ask mine later. Ashraf, you can go ahead and ask.
Thank you very much, Mohsen.
You're welcome.
It's a very useful presentation, at least in the context of the ongoing conflict over Strait of Hormuz water. So it's relevant, immediately relevant to that moment. I have a question. My first question is about the relationship between identity and water.
Identity and?
Water.
Water, yes, yeah.
Okay, this is my take on why we need the water perspective. One of the functions of that perspective is to transcend the dualism between mind and matter. But the way you talk about we talked about identity and water, the presentation, throughout the presentation, that we need to bring on board identity brings back that division, that divide. See, so the point here, to what extent water is an extension of identity and vice versa. See the point? And I mean, there's still some Cartesian division between water and identity, which I felt in your presentation.
Yeah.
I agree that the question of what's water is a modernist question. I entirely agree with you. It depends where you stand in the view of water. And I also agree with you. Peace, and Steve as well. Peace is achievable in the sense that we seek to achieve peace, but it's never. I'm sorry, it's not achievable in that sense, in the liberal sense. But we work to achieve it. We work towards it, but it's never achievable in full. It's always an ongoing project somehow. So the first thing we need to avoid is the liberal framework which divides peace into negative peace, positive peace, and so on. But this part of the, I mean, it will reproduce the same existing structure, colonial structure. The final point is not a final comment. Here. Yeah, it's about the politics of naming water. The effect of the politics of naming water, without falling into the
politics of meaning.
The politics of naming water.
Yeah.
But again, without falling into the trap of the dualism between epistemology and ontology. Let's take the example of the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Gulf. See the point? So how can you conceptualize that conflict over naming without falling into that dualism? Okay, I have to stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Very, 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 of course, challenging questions. I may not have answer for all of them, or I am just thinking loudly about it. But very, very, very good question, actually. That must be mentioned as well. Hopefully, I understood what you say. So first, start with water as identity. Let's agree that either we have an identity relation with water or not. This is one thing. I think from our childhood, from the stories from our parents, from the customary traditions that we have, water were somewhere on, and it shapes our identity. And identity, I know identity also in the political and social science is a very vague concept and very controversial, like the other ones, like the other concepts that we are talking about, the terms peace, interest, security. But anyway, we know that what we know about ourselves, about our identity, is more or less also shaped by water, or how we understand water is also shaped, is a intellectual interrelation between who I am and water as not a resource, as not an object. So this relation, every of us actually have this, and in our mindset. What I wanted to highlight here is that when we see water has a very significant role in shaping our identity and our society and our community, from individual to community and to the nation to a state, why in our policy response or in our way to respond to water or to use water or to manage water, we just ignore that identity? This is what I do try to say that this dominant knowledge, intentionally or unintentionally, and it might be because of the epistemology that they are rooted, might be from the Eurocentric knowledge. This relation of or identity relation with water was ignored or just hidden or just gone on. So this is important to just bring it back again to the not only bring it back to our policy analysis and to our analysis, but also make it the priority. So we can see some advanced literature analysis in political ecology and critical understanding of water that they also add identity and justice as also other variables of analysis. But what I did try to say here is that they are not the core factors. In the colonial approach, identity and equity must be prioritized. And through that, or at least must be the starting point of analysis and policy. This is then we can also achieve peace and security. Otherwise, they are very fragile. So I hope I answered the first question. Then I couldn't get the second, but you said peace is an ongoing project. And I said, yes, of course, peace is an ongoing process. And it's never stop on. But again, back to this dominant wisdom about peace, negative peace, positive peace. What is positive peace? What is I mean, the dominant knowledge also showing you that only make a framework without bringing justice and colonial history. So this is the way that you have to coming out of this box of the dominant box of liberal understanding of peace. So this is the second. And the politics of naming is also really linked again to my first point and what you said about identity as well and the history. So if you see, so you mentioned particularly Persian Gulf and some different actually seeing of those naming or what we see these days. The president of USA is coming to change the names of the some water bodies or lands that historically was other names. Of course, it's the politics of name, and you have to see what is behind that. One, you can say, okay, it may link to identity, and that is important, and you should respect. We should respect in treating water. Second, we have to be very careful and wise about this, especially those who are working on decolonial studies, to link to the third critic that I had, to geopolitical intervention. Why are they starting to change the names which have been historically and internationally recognized in what a specific name? Why they are going to change it, and why they are just misleading us from what the most rooted causes of the conflicts there are. So these politics of names, of course, I think I see much more abuse of the sensitive identity relations of a community for the sake of much more geopolitical intervention, and also hiding the most problem from the communities, or at least misleading us from those root causes. I hope I answer your question. I'm not sure if these are what you expected.
Yeah, you have answered my questions. Since there is no hand raised, I can't see anyone raising their hand. Can I just, because I'm learning from your presentation a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you say we need to bring identity to the table, this is why I struggle to dismantle the existing dualism, which makes identity, external to the interaction. In the sense that when you say, let's bring identity, you are presuming that there's something, entity, existing there, we need to go and bring it. And instead of looking at identity as an effect of that interaction between the body and the water. See the point?
Yeah.
And the second question is, you mentioned a point about as a solution to the conflict, to start from moving from including voices to redistributing power narrative or narrative power, sorry. How do you differentiate between voice and narrative in this statement? Thank you.
Yeah, that's very, very good questions, and not easy as well, I mean, to answer. One thing that we have actually struggling in bringing this decolonial approach or decolonial thinking is that even those scholars who are thinking on decolonial aspects, their mindset have been also affected by a century of cemented knowledge on. So it's not easy to bring back or think differently when for centuries there was something that we were told. So the first point that you said, yeah, bringing identity on the table. Of course, I mean, it's not like an object to bring, but the politics of resentment, identity, are ignored, have been ignored in water diplomacy, at least in my field. That means when you, in a liberal perspective, everything is being treated as neutral, not even bringing the power relation between who is coming to the table. So when I say decolonial approach in water diplomacy, that means do not start with who has interest. Of course, it's not about which one is the first, but that means let's start with the harms of people in relation to the water conflict. Let's link the discussion to the historical injustice first. Otherwise, if you ignore those things, those especially the relation of the identity of those community who has been oppressed in relation to that water, let's talk about the Palestine, for example, then you are going to make the interest of all parties met. You will have agreements, you will have treaty, you will have water allocation, and then you will make a tick that based on the liberal perspective, everything looks okay, without considering that how that community, that oppressed community and their identity relation to that water is being harmed or just damaged or ignored. So when I say giving attention, and not only giving attention, make it or prioritize the politics of resentment and identity, is because of the significant role of identity. And as you see across the world, at least in relation to water conflict, and I can say in many conflicts, identity and justice rest at the heart of those conflicts. And when we know that they rest at the heart of those conflicts, and then you ignore it, you're not going to solve it. You're just bringing or repeating some solution that we see at least in a half century. We produce lots of knowledge, lots of approaches, but still the problems are becoming much severe. So this is what I mean when I say bringing identity on the table. That means first giving attention. Second is also beyond that, making it priority, and starting with those to make collective identity between the society who are using the water. And about voices and narrative, of course, I mean, there are some, I mean, we're going to some philosophical definition likely, but I mean, the politics narrative is also very, very, very tricky. As we said, in decolonial approach, bringing your attention not only to narrative, is bringing to the architecture of narrative. Who is saying that narrative? For what? For what reason? Who is behind those narratives? So decolonial approach is shifting this attention to making, or at least first giving attention to different narratives related to water, and second, again, link those narratives not only to the interest of those narrator, making link to their politics of resentment as well. So yeah, I think it's this is something that I think now. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Cecile,
you.
a
You're
question.
welcome.
Thanks for your insightful talk. In your work, do you see any epistemological differences between communities who live near water and those who don't?
Who lead what? Is it in the chat?
Yes. In your work, do you see any epistemological differences between communities who live near water and those who don't?
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, as I said again, back to what Ashraf asked as well. I mean, this is exactly very important, that how we need to look at the identity relation with water, because if we just look at the communities and societies like the homogeneous groups, then you will bring only one solution for all of the communities, and that is the problem, because those communities who live next to river has different history, different narrative, and different identity. And this is very, very exemplified in the case of Palestine, for example, that you could see that how the olive trees, which is linked to the water issues, is very prominent in their identity. So of course it's very different, those people who live next to the sea or water body, to those who live, as Professor asked at the first, in desert. And this again giving us this important factor that we need to consider identity as a constitutive factor.
Yeah, if I can add something
Yeah.
amazing. So it means that you cannot take the nation state as a unit of analysis when you do that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. This is why, I mean, this dominant epistemology, or dominant wisdom, is very state-centric, as I mentioned in my presentation. And even in communities, if you go through different, I mean, even inside a nation, as you also mentioned, I mean, there are different communities who are behaving or having different identity relation to water. And
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's also good to mention as well. If you look at the capitalist black hole, and it's if the king of capitalist black hole, the Mammon, wants to keep this capitalist black hole, is mainly going to the state-centric version, because a state-centric is much more better serve that system. And by the way, which is state-centric? So you could see a link between that global system to the national elites who serve that system, and also to the local. And it's like a cycle. And unless you are not challenging this system, we are just repeating and repeating and repeating, and bringing knowledge for the sake of this system.
Okay. Sonia, you can ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
I love the work that you're doing, troubling taken for granted ideas like peace and security. And I agree that it's important to, in your words, move from managing conflict to confronting injustice. And to do that, you suggested several moves. You suggested moving from including voices to redistributing narrative power, from more expert knowledge to accountable knowledge production, and from peace as stability to peace as justice. I love all that. So in terms of moving from theory to practice in terms of praxis.
Very difficult. Yeah.
Have you been working on these moves already? Do you have examples of where these moves are happening and their material effects? Because I believe they probably are, but like Cecile pointed out, probably not, like at smaller scales, not at the nation
Yeah.
state level. So I'd love to hear current specific examples or even examples of your dreaming.
No, it's true. I mean, it's decolonial studies or acts is not just a dream, huh? Is ongoing and everyday politics of life that we everyone actually experience in our life, an individual scale to more national, global. So it's not a dream, but I agree with you that it looks very difficult and it looks very. I mean, many of the audience and students of my after they feel very disappointed and doomed. I'm feeling doomed because they see this structure is very strong. As I said, this is the black hole. It's a strong gravitational force that thinking, I mean, everything is synced into this. So I agree with you that it looks very difficult, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible to challenge it. And we should consider that at least it has a 500 years of history of this colonial and neo-colonial system on. And challenging this is not coming out of one day, or I mean, if we consider the time, at least it needs to the similar time just to change it. But the first thing is just changing the way that we look at the world, just making awareness of this capitalist black hole, that everything is not being solved, as I mentioned in the timeline of at least in the field of water and environment, at least half a century of with a good intention, we as scholars, practitioners sit together just to solve the water and environmental problems. Nothing happening. I mean, everything being much more worse and worse. And this is the place that at least I see my role, to make everyone aware of this system, that if you want to bring solution inside this system, we are in what I say in our paper, we are stuck in a water bubble. We have to go out of it first. So awareness that that this system doesn't work anymore. Second, you have to find something to go beyond this water bubble. And in terms of practice, I see a very good movement, especially considering the current and also for the past movements that we see, though it was very, very sad and tragic but you could see how populations across the world are becoming sensitive about this global system and protesting against this. So this is something that I see in the field of water as well. I can mention the case that we had in Colombia. There are Colombia has again colonial history from the Spain that came there, and also still very stuck in a neo-colonial system. And also struggling with this neoliberal state-centric system, and is very good example of serving the capitalist black hole in terms of producing cocoa or avocado or coffee for the world with the cost of deforestation, and also making poverty for the local people, and taking the food from them and just producing crops to export for luxury lifestyle in the north. So communities are starting to protest against very big companies like the sugar cane in a very small scale. And they have been successful in this way, that at least, I know the scale is very small, but at least it's one step further than if we look at the 10 years ago. And all of this is because of all these epistemological, I think, at least partly, awareness that all of this critical perspective and also decolonial approach contribute to that. So yeah, again, it's very difficult, as you said. It seems that impossible, but you could see, at least especially in the past years, that everything is going to be changed.
Thank you.
I hope I answer your question. Yeah, anyway.
Hanan has a question. I appreciate your references to Maulana Rumi. Could you please indicate the sources? Additionally, have you explored other Sufi materials concerning the symbolic and metaphysical significance of water?
Right, that is also a very good question. So it's not only about Sufism. And as I said, Maulana Rumi is just an idea, just to giving to us that we have many similar character and philosophies across the world. As I said, the Ubuntu in African philosophy. In Latin America we have, in India we have. And the idea is that a very deep relation of human with the world around. And it's bringing not only thinking about the resources of the world as just object and materialist approach just for this life. So they link these resources as just some connection with the human, their life, and also even in some concepts after this life. So through this way, it's not only talking about the economic, specifically materialist perspective. So when bringing these or highlighting these philosophy behind, then they are serious challenge for dominant wisdom. And this is why I try to highlight these philosophies across many societies that we have. And the problem is that many of them are forgotten or just considering as just very like the drama or like some poems that we read. But if bringing them in our practice, in our knowledge, then many things might be changed.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
I also have a question. Professor Makoni said something about the plurality of water, how water means different things to different people, different places. So I'd like to ask, how does like a decolonial water diplomacy, in this sense, if you're looking at different, how plural water is?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think we discussed about this before, but for me, decolonialization is not only bringing a plural or pluralism. I mean, it's important to bring all these views inside, but also it's important to make them in relation to the collective identity that we aim for this decolonization. So, yeah, as I said, yes, this pluralism is also a key in decolonization, but it's also differ to those critical perspective or to, like, for example, political ecology that highlighting pluralism. In decolonial aspect, it not only highlight pluralism or giving them as a role, but it also making a link with collective identity. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. If there are no questions, we'll move to the after party. Before
I think
that, I'd
Alice
like
as well mentioning something, poetry book.
Oh, okay. I think Anissa King has something for Cecile. Said in Alice Ward's poetry book that she says all voices should be read as the river's mutterings. The poem is made from the language of people who live and work on the River Dat.
Very, very good. Yeah, very nice. Well said. Yeah, amazing.
Thank you very much. Professor Makoni, do you have any last words? You are muted.
Move on to the after party. Yeah.
Okay.